For more than a decade, Chinese leaders have sought to convince both their own citizens and the outside world that their nation is rising to the level of a military superpower. State television shows endless footage of vast parades where columns of missiles roll across Tiananmen Square, gleaming destroyers cut through the ocean waves, and aircraft carriers loom on the horizon like floating fortresses. Commentators speak with pride about a Chinese century that will replace the American-dominated order. But the story presented in these images is increasingly at odds with reality. International analysts and even some voices inside China acknowledge that the actual strength of the People's Liberation Army Navy is far less than advertised. What Beijing calls an unstoppable force is riddled with technical flaws, logistical burdens, and political weaknesses that could cause the entire edifice to crumble in a real war. One example that exposes this contradiction is the radar systems placed on the newest generation of Chinese frigates. The Type 54B ships are promoted as carrying antennas several times larger than those of American vessels, supposedly capable of detecting threats at 3 times the range. On paper, this sounds like a triumph of Chinese engineering. In practice, however, the story is very different. To run at full power, these radars would need 36 megawatts of electricity, yet the ship's generator only produces 10. That means the system can never actually function as advertised. Instead of tripling detection distance, the effective range is only a fraction of what the United States has fielded for decades. The result is a Navy that looks formidable but is blind in critical moments. This pattern repeats itself across nearly every class of Chinese warship. Propaganda emphasizes the number of vessels launched each year, claiming that sheer quantity will overwhelm adversaries. But speed and maneuverability tell another story. The Type 54A and 54B frigates reach a maximum of only 25 to 27 knots. This is embarrassingly slower than the Shandong, China's own aircraft carrier, which itself is slower than its American and Japanese counterparts. Modern U.S. carriers are capable of 33 knots, and Japanese destroyers, fitted with advanced Rolls-Royce engines, can surpass that benchmark. Even worse, when Chinese ships activate their already underpowered radars, the speed falls by another 2 knots. In combat, where seconds determine life or death, this loss of agility could mean destruction before a single missile is fired. Air defense represents another glaring vulnerability. Chinese destroyers, such as the much-vaunted Type 55, are celebrated at home as world-class vessels, yet their primary shield remains a domestic copy of the Russian S-300 missile, rebranded as the HQ-9B. This system lacks the layered protection fielded by the U.S. Navy and the Japanese Maritime Self-Defense Force, which combine short-range ESSM interceptors, medium-range systems, and long-range SM-3 missiles into a dense web that can repel simultaneous attacks. By contrast, Chinese ships rely on a single layer that is easily saturated. Recent wars in Syria and Ukraine have already demonstrated the weakness of the S-300 and S-400 systems when confronted by Western precision weapons. If those advanced Russian platforms fail, then their Chinese derivatives are even less trustworthy. The vulnerability is so severe that many strategists argue the Chinese fleet could be neutralized in the opening hours of a conflict, without ever landing a decisive blow. Aircraft carriers, the pride of every maritime power, reveal even more of this contradiction between image and reality. The Shandong is held up by Chinese media as a symbol of national resurgence, proof that China has mastered the pinnacle of naval technology. But this vessel still depends on outdated boilers and steam turbines that require 48 hours to bring the ship from cold shutdown to full combat readiness. In comparison, Japanese carriers using gas turbine engines can be ready in minutes. The Shandong consumes more than 10 tons of food per day to feed its 3,000 crew members, creating a logistical nightmare that grows heavier with every additional day at sea. Instead of a mobile fortress projecting power across the Pacific, it risks becoming a floating liability that drains resources faster than it can demonstrate fighting power. The deeper one looks, the clearer it becomes that these weaknesses are not isolated technical glitches, but symptoms of a system that values appearances above performance. The leadership wants dramatic images for propaganda broadcasts more than it wants reliability under fire. The consequence is a navy that can intimidate on parade grounds, but may collapse when faced with adversaries who have trained, tested, and modernized for decades. The illusion of strength masks a dangerous fragility. Corruption is the second disease that eats away at the Chinese military from the inside. Defense industries are supposed to be the engines of innovation, but in China they often resemble vast patronage networks, where political loyalty matters more than technical competence. After the American withdrawal from Afghanistan, Chinese operatives purchased abandoned U.S. equipment through Taliban intermediaries. The plan was simple: copy everything. Tanks, drones, rifles, and communication systems were shipped back to laboratories where engineers attempted to reproduce them. But copying advanced technology without understanding the industrial ecosystem behind it leads to failure. The results were machines that looked like their Western counterparts, but performed miserably. Jet engines burned out after short use, helicopter blades cracked, and missile guidance systems malfunctioned. Soldiers who test these weapons are the ones who pay the price. During training exercises, bolts have sheared off mid-flight, welds have snapped under stress, and sensors have given false readings. Casualties mount quietly, often suppressed in official reports. Behind the curtain, insiders reveal that manufacturers routinely cut corners. Contracts are awarded not on merit, but on the size of the bribe. Millions of yuan change hands before a single component is produced, and by the time the project reaches the field, much of the budget has already disappeared into the pockets of managers and generals. Research funds meant for innovation are siphoned off, leaving laboratories under-equipped and reliant on outdated techniques. The outcome is weapons that are new only in name, fragile in reality, and dangerous to those expected to use them. This climate of corruption spreads beyond the factories into the ranks of veterans who once served faithfully. In a nation where parades celebrate the bravery of soldiers, the reality faced by those same men decades later is grim. Many veterans, now elderly and frail, suffer from illness and poverty. Promises of pensions and medical care are quietly broken. Groups of veterans travel to Beijing hoping to petition the government, but they are often stopped by police before entering the capital. Images circulate online of men in their 60s leaning on crutches at train stations, their faces lined with exhaustion, only to be herded back to their villages under guard. These pictures evoke outrage on social media, until censors erase them. The betrayal is stark. Men once hailed as heroes are treated as nuisances once their political usefulness has expired. The sense of abandonment is captured in the bitter words of a former soldier who explained that when the party needed him, they beat the drums to send him to war. When they achieved victory, the drums welcomed him home, but once they no longer needed him, they could do anything to him. Such confessions resonate deeply with ordinary citizens, exposing the gap between the official narrative of honor and the lived reality of neglect. The suffering of veterans reflects a broader truth. Loyalty to the party does not guarantee protection once that loyalty is no longer valuable. The instability extends into the highest ranks. In September, Beijing abruptly announced the dismissal of 1 general and 3 lieutenant generals. The move shocked observers not because of corruption, which is common, but because of the scale and coordination. These officers came from different branches, including the People's Armed Police and the Rocket Force, yet they all belonged to the Eastern faction that was once considered unshakably loyal. Their simultaneous downfall signals that Xi Jinping is conducting a purge unprecedented in modern Chinese history. Entire chains of command are decapitated overnight. Soldiers wake up to find that their commanders have vanished without explanation. Behind official statements about discipline and integrity lies a fierce power struggle. Factions within the military vie for survival. It is whispered that Vice Chairman of the Central Military Commission Zhang Yuxia is building a network of allies to resist Xi's tightening grip. The result is a climate of fear, where officers spend more time calculating political loyalty than preparing for battle. Promotions are awarded to those who show devotion to Xi personally, regardless of competence. In such an environment, planning and coordination suffer. Decisions become reactive, inconsistent, and vulnerable to paralysis. The purge weakens not only the individuals removed, but the entire institution, as trust erodes and suspicion spreads through every level. This disarray is not limited to domestic politics. It influences how China interacts with the outside world. When the United States was thrown into shock by the assassination of conservative figure Charlie Kirk, the reaction in Beijing revealed much about the mindset of the regime. Instead of offering condolences or maintaining diplomatic neutrality, state media responded with glee. Editorials mocked the death, quoting Mao Zedong to describe it as light as a feather. The spectacle of a government celebrating the murder of a young political leader abroad shocked global audiences. Far from demonstrating strength, it exposed a moral vacuum. The inability to restrain propaganda organs from reveling in tragedy highlighted a deep insecurity. Beijing seeks every opportunity to project the decline of the West in order to distract from its own vulnerabilities. But such joy is short-lived and dangerous. It feeds an echo chamber in which Chinese leaders convince themselves that their adversaries are collapsing while ignoring the crises at home. International condemnation was swift, further isolating Beijing and reinforcing the perception that the regime thrives on hostility rather than cooperation. At the same time, ordinary Chinese citizens watched the reaction with mixed feelings. Some repeated the official line, but others questioned why their government was so eager to celebrate death abroad, while failing to care for veterans, workers, and struggling families at home. As these contradictions pile up, the picture becomes clear. The massive radars that cannot operate at full power, the frigates that crawl slower than their own carriers, the destroyers armed with outdated missiles, the aircraft carrier that takes 2 days to awaken, the factories that produce dangerous copies, the veterans left in misery, the generals purged in fear, the propaganda that rejoices in tragedy abroad. All these elements combine into a portrait of a military machine that is more illusion than reality. The danger lies not only in weakness itself, but in the decisions that weakness may inspire. Leaders who believe their own propaganda may gamble recklessly, launching conflicts under the false assumption that their forces are invincible. In such a scenario, millions could pay the price. The illusion of power is seductive. It convinces domestic audiences to rally around national pride. It intimidates neighbors who see endless news of new ships sliding into the water, but illusions cannot withstand the test of war. When logistics falter, when copied weapons fail, when commanders are removed overnight, when corruption rots every link in the chain, the truth surfaces brutally. China's military buildup is not the unstoppable juggernaut portrayed in state media. It is a fragile edifice built on corruption, fear, and propaganda. The more the leadership believes in this mirage, the greater the risk that they will stumble into disaster.